Hey guys, welcome back to another update video of The Bazaar. Today, we're going to be talking about a troublesome mechanic we encountered, pushing and pulling. Last time, we talked about adding rows to the game. Rows enable us to add some other mechanics. We wanted to add a pushing mechanic that moves items back and a pulling one that moves them forward. We could make a harpoon item that pulls the opponent's items forward, or a bulldozer item that pushes them backwards. Because it's a lot easier to attack the front row, this actually matters a lot. Part of our job as game designers is to describe in great detail how everything is going to work. We have a development team that does the coding part of the project. So we are not the ones actually implementing our ideas. Our ideas have to be fully formed before we can get anything put into a build of the game. They need to know how everything will work with no ambiguity, down to all the small corner cases. And we need to put this into writing so that the entire team can be on the same page about it. We thought the pushing and pulling mechanics would take 2 minutes to put into writing. It just seems like such a simple concept. You know, item moves forward, item moves backward. But it turned out to be a very problematic thing to write, and the main problem was deciding which horizontal slot the item would end up on. If you were to pull a small item from the opponent's backline and move it to their front line, we had to decide where it would end up relative to their other items, and there was a bunch of options often. It turns out that when items have different sizes, this can get really complicated. So for each case, there's an intuitive answer for where the item should move. The challenge for us was to write out simple rules that would move the item to that expected position. And we really wanted these rules to be predictable for players, and we wanted it to visually make sense. Our first attempt at pulling was to just move the item straight forward, and any items in its way would move to the right. After we went through a few more examples, we realized that this rule doesn't work very well. The item being pulled would sometimes end up farther from the item pulling it than where it started. We thought we could solve it by making the items beneath it move apart based on if it's more left or more right of the item being pulled. We would only default left if the items were perfectly in line with each other. After we went through even more examples, we realized that this solution still had the same problem. There was a few cases where the pulled item would end up farther away from the pulling item than where it started. We realized that for the pulling mechanic, if we only considered the position of the item being pulled, it would never look quite right. Because this solution didn't work for the pulling mechanic, we thought we would try a second one that uses the position of both the items to determine where the pulled item should land. For our math behind the scenes, we divided the board into 10 different slots. If the items were on slots 3 and 9, we would pull the target item to slot 6, the median between the two. This system seemed like it would be the most true to actual pulling, because the pulled item would end up somewhere between where it was and where it was being pulled to. The problem with this model was that it was too hard to predict. We want players to reliably know where the items will end up. With this system, there was a lot of calculation you'd have to do to figure out where an item would end up. You have to figure out their position values and average them. And if there was items in the way, you'd have to do even more math about those items. If a player ever wanted to know the precise location where things would end up, it was too difficult. They would have to do this math every time they think about targeting anything with a pulling item. It would make them too hard to use if the position mattered. Because this solution required too much calculation, we came up with a third new solution that would be a simpler version of that. For this new solution, we tried dividing the board in half. Whenever an item would pull another item on the same half of the board, the target would move to the edge of that half. Whenever the two items were on opposite halves of the board, the target item would be pulled to the middle. After we thought through more examples, we realized that there was just more glaring counterexamples to this solution. It was too simplistic. Always sending the items to one of the edges would look really weird some of the time. At this point, we weren't happy with any of our proposed solutions. All of them just looked wrong, or were too complicated for the player to figure out. We realized that as long as the pulled item ends up near the pulling item, it looks intuitive enough. This thought brought us to our final solution. Whenever we pull an item, let's just move it straight across from the item that's pulling it, regardless of where it is now. This solution seemed to have the best balance of visual appeal and intuitiveness. It was the most predictable of our solutions, and visually it looked pretty good. Any counterexamples we could think of for it were pretty minor and didn't seem nearly as problematic as in the other solutions. What we thought would be a 2-minute conversation ended up taking us hours over multiple days, and we had to use these blank playing cards to act out a bunch of counterexamples. All the problems stemmed from determining the target position, and it seemed really odd that something so minor and often irrelevant could be so problematic to define. This is the reality of game design. All the small little details have to be worked out in order to actually build the game. Even if something only matters in 1 in 100 games, you still have to incorporate that solution into your rule set. And sometimes that one weird corner case can demand more of your attention than the other 99 games. Hopefully you found this pretty interesting. This video was really in the weeds about a single mechanic, and that's a lot of what game design is. You really gotta dive in the weeds. If you have any thoughts, leave a comment down below. We'll see you in a week for the next update of The Bazaar.